Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Jewish groups and some Labour MPs are demonstrating in Westminster this evening against what they say is anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn's failure to stop it. This is despite the Labour leader apologising yesterday and again this afternoon for what he called pockets of anti-Semitism within the party. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg is in Westminster for us this evening. And Laura, it's not the first time these allegations have been made against the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, so how big a problem is this for him?
Well, Fiona, you're right. And one of the frustrations amongst the Jewish community and among Jewish MPs that this has been building for a long time. And they believe that for several years, Jeremy Corbyn has simply been shown to be too reluctant to deal with this quickly. There have been continued promises to stamp it out, but they frankly just believe that he has not done enough and that somehow, whether unwittingly or not, he's just seemed to be too tolerant of some of the kinds of views that are sometimes advanced. Something very strange is happening tonight. Normally people come to Westminster to protest against the government. This time they've come to protest against the opposition. But there's a lot of suspicion in the Labour Party, and some of Jeremy Corbyn's most ardent supporters have turned up too.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
Trouble and strife. The leaders of Britain's biggest Jewish groups had planned a protest, furious at what they see as Jeremy Corbyn picking the wrong side.
Jeremy Corbyn attempted to tackle anti-Semitism.
But before it could even start, some of his most ardent supporters arrived. Instead of protest, argument.
I'm ashamed of you and all those.
Yeah, shame on you! A clash as a religious group protests against a major political party in the 21st century.
And those people that call themselves socialists, those people that say that they're anti-racist, that they're anti-fascist, should be ashamed of themselves unless they're standing in solidarity with the Jewish community and the Jewish labour movement.
Why the anger? There have been worries over several years. Back in 2016, a Labour MP was suspended over anti-Semitic posts online, later apologising.
You said that Hitler supported Zionism. No. I mean, that's just nonsense.
No, it's not nonsense.
But there was fury when she was defended by Jeremy Corbyn's old friend Ken Livingstone.
If you read Mein Kampf, he's clearly completely mad.
Who repeatedly said that Hitler had supported Zionism in the early 30s. Then the official party report into prejudice against Jews was marked by a clash.
We'll see who's working hand in hand. I'm pleased that...
Where one activist criticised a Jewish MP. Recently, Mr. Corbyn was found to have been a member of some online groups that contained offensive comments. And in the last few days, he apologised for arguing to preserve this image you might find offensive. A mural which depicts known stereotypes of Jews.
Morning, Mr. Corbyn.
Good morning. Good morning.
Mr. Corbyn has continually condemned all forms of racism, but it's not until the last 24 hours that he's shown such a level of specific regret. Speeding off this morning, he's turned down interviews, but in a letter to Jewish leaders wrote, "I recognise that anti-Semitism has surfaced within the Labour Party and has too often been dismissed as simply a matter of a few bad apples. This has caused pain and hurt to Jewish members of our party and the wider Jewish community. I'm sincerely sorry for the pain which has been caused and pledge to redouble my efforts to bring this anxiety to an end. I am your ally and always will be."
All of us, from the top to the bottom of the party, need to reflect on the approach that we've taken and ask ourselves what else we can do.
Shame! You should be ashamed of yourselves.
But there's no sign of a united front.
The criticisms of Jeremy Corbyn haven't stopped for the last 2 years since he became leader. He has done a lot to deal with allegations of anti-Semitism.
Protest? Yes. Peaceful. Take a look. The Labour leader now acknowledges this problem, but a solution? Not much sign. And it's important to say Jeremy Corbyn has always said he opposes all forms of racism. He has always said that he will not tolerate any abuse in the Labour Party. But Fiona, it's only really in the last 2 or 3 days that he has started to apologise for this problem specifically. And that has been a source of great frustration. And we've seen in that protest in the last half hour or so, the Labour Party is struggling to show a united front.
Laura at Westminster, thank you.
Jeremy Corbyn has finally issued a detailed apology for the anti-Semitism he now admits has surfaced in the Labour Party during his time as leader. Just 24 hours after infuriating some of his MPs with his description of pockets of anti-Semitism in the party, he's admitted the problem has too often been dismissed as simply a matter of a few bad apples. His open letter to Jewish leaders came after they accused him of presiding over institutional anti-Semitism. They're protesting in Parliament tonight, as Gary Gibbon reports.
Say now in unison, so that he can hear you over there. Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Leaders of a religious community protesting outside Parliament about the leader of the opposition. We haven't seen this in recent times. The campaigners say Jeremy Corbyn's worldview is instinctively hostile to Jewish communities. And look who turned up in their support. Do you worry he doesn't get it?
Well, I think it's important for people to come out, stand up and be counted, and that's what I'm doing.
The very existence of my party, the Labour Party, is at stake. We have to win this. We will win this. Every racist anti-Semite out of the Labour Party. It's time for Jeremy Corbyn to act.
Around 40 Labour parliamentarians were joined by Tories, DUP and others. Jeremy Corbyn wrote back to the Jewish community leaders saying he wanted an urgent meeting with them. He said he accepted anti-Semitic attitudes have surfaced more often in our ranks in recent years. The party, he wrote, has been too slow in processing some of the cases that have emerged. In the letter, the Labour leader described as evil the imagery used in the East London mural, depicting Jewish capitalists exploiting workers. And he repeated his regret that he originally defended the mural 6 years ago. Mr Corbyn's critics and fans in the Labour movement speak of experiencing anti-Semitism, but push different responses.
I've had an instance where I called someone out for Islamophobia and her response was, "Don't worry, Charlotte, I'll get to the Jews next." I think that the issues go a bit wider than one man in particular, and I think also that the way that the statement is more or less an attack on Corbyn entrenches a lot of his supporters in their view that anti-Semitism is just something that is, you know, a tool to bash Corbyn with, as opposed to it being something that's a genuine issue that needs to be addressed.
In 7 of the last 9 of my local party's meetings, there have been motions targeting Jews, targeting Israel, but not just Israeli policy, phrased in such a way that became about Jews as well. That's been the problem. There's been this space that's opened up since he was elected leader. Not because I think he wants these things to happen, I don't believe he does, but because he's not prepared to take action against those who identify sometimes with his cause, and that's been the problem.
A rival smaller demonstration pitched up on Parliament Square, Jewish supporters of Mr Corbyn. Some here suspect allegations of anti-Semitism are a put-up job by Mr Corbyn's political opponents. And that was a view Jeremy Corbyn himself seemed to take when he was filmed 2 years ago responding to a newspaper article alleging widespread anti-Semitism in the party.
Jonathan Friedland article in The Guardian. It's anti-Semitism. Labour has a problem with anti-Semitism under Corbyn. Utterly disgusting, subliminal nastiness. A whole lot of it, you know.
Little acts of anti-Semitism associating with blood.
Yes, your opinion has been all over the media. This is my turn to have our opinion.
I'm standing here and I'm entitled to express my view.
Let her have an interview.
Use force.
I'm not using force.
No.
I'm trying to stop you disrupting an interview so
No.
that everyone can have their voice heard.
I think it's mostly about stirring up fear about Jeremy Corbyn, who is a solid anti-racist activist. You can look at his record throughout his entire life. There are many, many examples of him working with the Jewish community.
Labour MPs returned to the Commons for a meeting of the parliamentary party.
I feel almost like I'm going to cry. I feel so ashamed right now that it's come to this, and that's why I really want to be in the PLP, and I suspect Chuka does too.
Yeah.
I really am ashamed that it's at this point.
Disgrace. It's disgraceful it's come to this. It's disgraceful.
Anti-Semitism in the party dominated that meeting. Well, that meeting broke up a short while ago, and one of the MPs who just saw going in, Luciana Berger, spoke a pretty impassioned way about the pain she said the Jewish community was going through. She got a standing ovation from a lot of MPs in the room. Not many Corbyn supporters turned up, but there were quite a few shadow cabinet ministers. They didn't stand up and got heckled for that. Jeremy Corbyn, I think, feels that he has engaged with the criticisms that were made in that letter from the Jewish community leaders, talking about how there is a very particular phenomenon of anti-Semitism that breeds on the far left, and that political education within the party should go further. But at the moment we're waiting to see whether there is going to be a meeting between him and the Jewish community leaders. He said he wants it urgently. Jeremy Corbyn wasn't at that meeting of the PLP because he was in the House of Commons talking about Russia, and he might have hoped for a tiny bit of respite there. He didn't really get it. He did incidentally harden up Labour's line, saying that there is a case for Russia to answer on the attacks in Salisbury. But just as he was getting into his stride and knocking back criticism that he'd never attacked Russia in the past, one Labour MP got up and said, reading out from the Morning Star, here's proof that you didn't actually attack them at all. So these two issues, anti-Semitism and Russia, really raising the temperature in the Labour Party just as the local election campaign starts.
Gary, thanks very much. Well, from Westminster now is the MP Ruth Smeeth, who's Vice Chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party and herself a victim of alleged anti-Semitism at the launch of Labour's report into the subject in 2016. But first, with me here in the studio is Ian Saville, who's a committee member of Jewish Voice for Labour. Ian Saville, why do you think it has taken so long for Jeremy Corbyn to admit that Labour has a problem with anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that Labour in particular has a problem with anti-Semitism. The Labour Party is a party of 500,000 people or more, and of course there are some people among those 500,000 who are going to be anti-Semitic.
A few bad apples?
No, I wouldn't put it as a few bad apples. Anti-Semitism is a terrible, awful thing, and we should, you know, one anti-Semite in our party is one too many.
But you don't think that Labour has a problem with anti-Semitism, and yet Jeremy Corbyn in his letter says, I recognise that anti-Semitism has surfaced within the Labour Party and has too often been dismissed as simply a matter of a few bad apples. You seem to be saying that...
I'm saying
a few
it has surfaced.
Examples.
It has surfaced, and where we as an organisation, we're a Jewish group consisting of members of the Labour Party, where we have seen it, we have called it out. We've looked at people's these sort of social media postings that are anti-Semitic. We have.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's only just quit one Facebook group which posts some pretty awful anti-Jewish imagery.
Yeah. Well, I know that.
That's not calling it out.
The problem with Facebook is that, as you may know, it's very easy to be made a member of a group without even being particularly aware of it, and it can take some time before you're aware that you're a member of a group before you see what's in a group.
But you know, people were telling Jeremy Corbyn about the problems they had within the party, and according to the Board of Deputies, anti-Semitism was pretty endemic. I mean, just a quote from their letter to Jeremy Corbyn, there's literally not a single day in which Labour Party spaces, either online or in meetings, do not repeat the same fundamental anti-Semitic slanders against Jews. How come you were oblivious to that?
No, anti-Semitism is not endemic in the Labour Party. A big academic and a big survey was undertaken about a year ago by the Institute for Jewish Policy Research, which found that Labour Party members and Labour Party voters were actually less likely to be anti-Semitic than the general level of anti-Semitism in the country.
So
and among the parties, if I can just say, among the parties, Actually, the bigger problem is with parties of the right. The Labour Party is an anti-racist party, and it's a party against anti-Semitism, and it always has been, and Jeremy Corbyn always has been.
Well, actually, let me pick you up on that point.
Yeah.
Because what the Board of Deputies are saying is that this is part of a pattern, that Jeremy Corbyn called Hamas and Hezbollah his friends, despite terrorist atrocities committed against Jews. And to quote again, Raed Salah says Jews kill Christian children to drink their blood. Corbyn opposes his extradition and invites him for tea at the House of Commons. There's a history here, isn't there?
All of those things are disputed.
Well, he's apologised, but again, after the event.
The Raed Salah thing is disputed. In fact, he was actually allowed by the Home Office to be to come into the country. So those statements which have been attributed to him, I don't know the full details of that case, but it appears that
well, he said he didn't know about Raed Salah's record at the time, and he's also said that he now regrets calling Hamas and Hezbollah his friend.
For certain that a few weeks ago, a very high-up member of the Conservative Party, former advisor to Theresa May, made statements which have been certainly interpreted as anti-Semitic.
Well, we'll debate that another time. We're talking about anti-Semitism within Labour. So thank you very much, Ian Saville. I'll turn now to Ruth Smeeth, Labour MP. Jeremy Corbyn's letter acknowledges the anger and the upset. It recognises, doesn't it, that anti-Semitism has been a problem within Labour. Do you think the Labour leader now has done enough to prove to you that he accepts the problem and he's going to deal with it?
Today is a really, really dark day for the Labour Party, and anyone that says otherwise is kidding themselves. What we saw today was a demonstration from one of our most established faith communities, of which I am a member. They felt the need to come and protest outside Parliament about the actions, or rather inaction, of the leader of Her Majesty's opposition. This is a heartbreaking day to be a Jewish Labour Member of Parliament, and it's a heartbreaking point where we're at. And in terms of Jeremy's statement, it is devastating for me that we got to the point where the Jewish community came to protest, and that's when we finally got a proper statement. And
you think he was press-ganged into it?
Well, that was the third iteration of the statement that developed over the weekend. I'm delighted that we've now seen proper words, but actually, given the events of the last 2 years that we've seen throughout the Labour Party, it's time for actions, not words. Jeremy has to stand by those people who are victims, and he has to call it out. And what was so disappointing for me personally today, and I think for many people, is that there was no condemnation of the counter demonstration today. We literally saw an anti-Semitism demo with a counter-protest. This is an extraordinary thing that we've seen today, and it is devastating.
Jeremy Corbyn can't police who turns up to protest, but can't you celebrate a turning point now that he's got the problem and he's going to do something about it?
Jeremy Corbyn could have asked those people not to do it in his name. They just, your spokesperson from the Jewish Voices for Labour, whoever they are, just said that they were doing it to support Jeremy and that they were members of the Labour Party. Jeremy could have intervened and chose not to. Today better be a turning point. We deserve more than what we've had, so today should be a turning point. There are too many people, there are too many active members of the Labour Party, Jewish members of the Labour Party, who feel too intimidated to go to meetings, and that includes councillors. We're at a point where enough is enough.
Aren't you worried, very briefly, that this is being weaponised by your opponents?
I think this is weaponised by who? I mean, my concern is that we've given this now as an excuse to other people. And in terms of talking, and one of the disappointing things about your previous guest is it's the whataboutery. We are in no position to comment on anyone else till we've got our own house in order, and there is a job of work to be done. And Jeremy needs to do it from the top.
Ruth Smeeth, thank you very much for joining us.
Now, what on earth, you may ask, is going on inside the Labour Party at the moment, which seems to be courting the most unhelpful of headlines? Well, in the end today, with hundreds of demonstrators, including some of his own MPs, protesting outside Parliament, a bizarre sight all of its own, you might argue Jeremy Corbyn had no choice, but he has written again to the leaders of Jewish groups, conceding there is a problem in the Labour Party with anti-Semitism, which, yes, it has failed to address.
Enough is enough! Enough is enough! Enough is enough!
Jeremy Corbyn's joined many protests over the years, but this one's about him.
It's time for Jeremy Corbyn to act.
Jewish representatives, and Labour ones too, demonstrating against their own leader in a row over anti-Semitism, which cuts right through this crowd.
Anti-Semitism? No, it's all true.
Rival camps clashing over whether there's anything to protest.
This just shows quite the pain that the Jewish community feel about what's happening within the Labour Party and why I can't believe that it's come to this. This is a heartbreaking day for the Labour Party and it's heartbreaking for the community.
For this demonstration to take place against the leader of Her Majesty's opposition is unprecedented. That shows you how far things have gone. Enough is enough.
Why are you protesting if you admit that anti-Semitism is a problem in the Labour Party?
Because it is not overwhelmingly a problem in Labour. It is not a reason for people to be thrown out of the party.
I feel almost like I'm going to cry. I feel so ashamed right now that it's come to this.
As he wished journalists a good morning, it was clear Jeremy Corbyn wasn't having one himself. And hours later, he was forced to issue his fourth statement since Friday. Finally conceding in a letter to Jewish leaders, I recognise that anti-Semitism has surfaced within the Labour Party and has too often been dismissed as simply a matter of a few bad apples. I am sincerely sorry for the pain which has been caused in this fight. I am your ally and always will be. It's this mural that's once again painted a picture of anti-Semitism in Labour. Jeremy Corbyn accused of showing his support for it, despite the fact it depicts Jewish people getting rich on the backs of others. He said he regrets that, and plenty more.
Yes, you're a lying racist. Really? Why don't you go and check the history? A Nazi apologist.
The former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, embroiled in just one of several rows over anti-Semitism in this party, with some of its biggest Jewish backers now wondering whether they belong.
There is an element within my community who are solidly Labour and who are now deeply concerned about being part of this party.
Do you feel that you may have to leave this party?
Well, that's the most tricky question that I have to face and put myself under the microscope to consider that.
Tonight, Jeremy Corbyn promises he's facing up to this problem and to those who've left him little option. Paul Brand, News at 10, Westminster.
Hundreds of people gathered in Parliament Square earlier to protest against anti-Semitism within parts of the Labour Party. This afternoon, its leader, Jeremy Corbyn, apologised for the pain which had been caused to Jewish members of the party and to the wider Jewish community, and described himself as a militant opponent of anti-Semitism. In a letter to the Board of Deputies and Jewish Leadership Council, he acknowledged that the party had been too slow to process some claims after he was criticised for failing to tackle it consistently or effectively enough. Earlier, the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, told this programme he did not think Jeremy Corbyn was anti-Semitic, but believed neither Corbyn nor the people around him had understood the seriousness of the problem that faced Labour. In a moment, we'll hear from a key member of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. First, our political editor, Nick Watt, has this report.
Angry, defiant and determined.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
They gathered in the shadow of Parliament to express fury at anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
I tell you that anti-Semitism is very real and it is alive in the Labour Party. And with the Jewish Labour movement's proud 125-year history and association with both the Labour movement and the Labour Party, it pains me to have to stand before you and say that today.
In the warm glow of a spring evening, Britain's Jewish community organised an unprecedented protest against the leader of the official opposition after accusing Jeremy Corbyn of siding with anti-Semites.
I'm not hurt. I'm absolutely wild that this should happen in this country, the country that I love.
I think it's really important that people are having this conversation right now because it's something that's been going on for, years,
I can't see how any members of the nearly 300,000 of our community here can bring themselves to vote Labour anymore.
The Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Jewish Leadership Council acted after the Labour leader appeared to take the side of a graffiti artist who had painted a mural widely regarded as anti-Semitic. In 2012, Jeremy Corbyn posted a Facebook comment supporting Mir One in his campaign to stop the whitewashing of his mural. Last week it emerged that Jeremy Corbyn was a member of 2 pro-Palestinian Facebook groups, some of whose members posted anti-Semitic comments. On Friday, the Labour MP Luciana Berger asked Jeremy Corbyn for an explanation of his views about the mural after she noticed it on her Twitter timeline. Later that afternoon, Jeremy Corbyn released a statement saying he had defended the mural on the grounds of free speech, but that it was offensive and anti-Semitic, and it was right that it had been removed. After criticism from Labour MPs, Jeremy Corbyn released a second statement in which he expressed regret for not looking more closely at the mural, which he described as deeply disturbing and anti-Semitic.
So warm support for the Labour MPs who addressed this rally here in Parliament Square. But real anger with Jeremy Corbyn, even after he declared himself this evening as a militant opponent of anti-Semitism. This was Britain's Jewish community and their supporters, making clear that they are rallying behind one very simple message: enough is enough. One advisor to a Labour frontbencher turned up to register her unease.
I don't believe Jeremy is anti-Semitic. I believe he is surrounded by those that are. And I think if he has to be brave, he has to be forthright, and he has to stop carrying on the way he is and deal with the issue, take the bull by the horns and remove those in the party that are anti-Semitic. If you're Jewish, you know the difference between anti-Semitic and those that have an issue with the foreign policy in Israel.
One Labour frontbencher suggested that his leader had acted just in time.
Well, I genuinely believe that Jeremy is someone who was drawn into politics because he was an anti-racist to his absolute core, that he hates anti-Semitism, and now he's the leader of the party. He has got the chance to ensure that everyone hears that voice that he's given us today, that there is no place for anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. There will be no place for anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. You cannot be an anti-Semite and carry a Labour Party membership card. Those two things are simply incompatible.
Some supporters of Jeremy Corbyn believe he's the victim of a witch hunt.
Our concerns is there's a sort of unjust process going on in which people who are accused of anti-Semitism without being allowed to show the evidence and assess the evidence. There's also been this continuous campaign since Corbyn became leader about the fact that the Labour Party is institutionally anti-Semitic or rampant anti-Semitism. As you know, and I'm a Jew, there is some anti-Semitism everywhere. However, a study actually commissioned by a Jewish group, I think Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, discovered that the majority of anti-Semitism is occurring on the far right. We hear very little about that.
Jeremy Corbyn hopes to win over the protesters by describing himself as a militant opponent of anti-Semitism. But as they dispersed into the balmy evening air, many appeared to be unmoved. Nick, what there? Well, Labour's Transport Secretary is Andy McDonnell, and I spoke to him this evening and asked him if he found it shameful that the Labour Party and its leaders were the subject of a protest from the mainstream Jewish community.
That's really disappointing that we've had that protest, but I think I'm more reassured at the response from Jeremy and the determination to take on anti-Semitism head-on and weed it out of our party.
You find it disappointing? Why was the protest disappointing?
Well, people have got to express their views. That's absolutely acceptable. But it's disappointing that we've got in this situation. That's very unfortunate that we're at this particular point. That's what I'm trying to communicate to you.
You make it sound like you don't understand why.
Oh no, I do.
I
understand entirely why the party's in this place, and that's why I'm pleased that we are getting to grips with this and really taking it on head on. You know, there's been some of the complaints about anti-Semitism in the party have been far too long in the investigation. We've got to deal with these issues, and you know, Jeremy has written to the Board of Deputies and explained how sorry he is for the hurt that's been caused. So that's not in any doubt.
Let's go through all those then. Do you agree that the disciplinary process itself is woeful for dealing with these complaints?
Well, we've heard not that long ago today just that where we are with that process, and that's not acceptable. And I think
how are you? How many reports have you received then?
Well, it was announced to us in some detail at the Parliamentary Labour Party tonight, but I haven't got that detail.
You
in
don't
front
know
of
how
me.
many complaints you've had?
I haven't, because I've just heard it's just a few short minutes ago.
Do you know how many the party's actually dealt with successfully?
I can't give the number accurately, Emily, but it is a matter of record, and I'm sure that the point is that these processes have been far too slow, and we've got a new General Secretary, and I think that's going to be top of her agenda to address this issue, because people have quite legitimately said this isn't good enough, and I hear that absolutely clearly.
Let's get on to the solutions then. The Jewish communities recommend an independent body to perform an audit of the disciplinary process and an accompanying process so that older complaints that have been ignored in the past can be sent through. Would you back that?
Well, there's been the invitation for an early meeting with the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council, and that's going to happen imminently. So
why do you need that? You've heard what they're recommending already.
Let's have that discussion. I think there's an open invitation. Jeremy's made that early doors, is to say, please come in, let's have that conversation, and that's surely something that can be right at the top of that agenda.
A lot of people will be wincing at that phrase, early doors, because you know that this has been going on for a long time. You know that in 2016, the report into your own party by Shami Chakrabarti said there are elements of the Labour Party which are institutionally anti-Semitic. The failure of the Labour Party to deal consistently and effectively with anti-Semitic incidents in recent years risks lending force to allegations that elements of the Labour Party are institutionally anti-Semitic. That was 2016. The mural comments came from 2012. This didn't happen yesterday.
No, you're absolutely right, it hasn't. And we are acknowledging that this has got to be done infinitely better than has been the case thus far. And that's what Jeremy is saying, that in words of one syllable, he's apologising for the hurt. He's acknowledging the offence that has been caused.
He's doing
and
more
wants
than that,
to deal.
actually. He's saying he won't tolerate any form of anti-Semitism. He's going to redouble his efforts, and he's committed to eliminating any anti-Semitism that exists. So let me take your leader at his words. What does that mean? When you hear Jewish community figures saying they need to heed the explicit concerns about anti-Semitic discourse, for example, set out the immediate expulsion for those using Zionist or Zionism as a pejorative term. Will that be done?
Well, we've set that out, and Shami set that out in her report, and we've got to make sure that it's properly implemented in full. We've got to make sure that the processes are speeded up. We've got to make sure that there's training right across the party. It's not an insignificant matter to say that that's an urgent need that needs to be
immediate
addressed.
Expulsion for those indulging in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories or making Nazi comparisons.
Well, there are processes available to the General Secretary to bring about immediate suspensions of people. That can be an executive decision, and that has happened. But at the end of the day,
there are suspensions that have been going on for 2 years.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, people do need to have some sense of due process. But it's quite clear when people express themselves in that heinous way, it's almost beyond doubt that the exit door will be shown to them. We want people let out of that party. Well, he is subject to due process, and I'm not going to sit here and sit in judgment on each and every individual case.
He's been suspended from the party and he's not been expelled.
Everybody's entitled to due process in those circumstances.
All I'm asking is how long it takes.
Well, it's taking too long, and we're acknowledging that that's the case, Emily. We're saying very clearly that process has to be speeded up.
Why was Len McCluskey then just last September telling me it was all mood music? He's the head of Unite Union.
Well, I wasn't party to that conversation. You're asking me
No,
about...
you heard the comments. They were widely reported. He called it mood music.
No, well, I think to try to dilute the enormity of this issue is the wrong response from wherever it would come. I'm trying to make abundantly clear that this is taken very, very seriously, and we want to have that direct response to genuine concerns that people raise, and they will be dealt with.
One commentator put it like this: it's as if he's standing knee-deep in a sewer and he hasn't even noticed the stench.
Well, you're asking me... well, clearly, if that's the case, I don't know about those Facebook entries, but Jeremy is absolutely standing by the Jewish community and saying we're going to drive anti-Semitism out of the party and we want it out of our society. He's made it, he couldn't be clearer in his attitude towards this issue.
That was Andy McDonald speaking to me a little bit earlier. And as you saw, this issue was played out today in that protest at Parliament and at what sounds like a heated meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Louise Ellman was at both. She's also a former chair of the Labour Jewish movement. She's with me now. Louise Ellman, just give me a sense of flavour, first of all, of the PLP, because we didn't see inside that. What was your sense of the spirit in there?
There was a lot of concern expressed in the PLP at the state the Labour Party has now reached. It's absolutely unprecedented for the mainstream Jewish community to feel they have to take to the streets to protest against anti-Semitism in a major political party.
So do you sense now, because of what's happened in the last 24 hours, that we're at a turning point and that the party has now at a place where it can get to grips with it?
Well, Jeremy seems to have had a great difficulty in recognising left anti-Semitism. He understands right-wing anti-Semitism, but not left-wing anti-Semitism. And the test now is about what he is actually going to do. And what he must do immediately is to tell his supporters to stop making allegations that allegations of anti-Semitism are smears against his leadership. They must put a stop to that immediately. And then he must make sure that all those outstanding cases of anti-Semitism that haven't been heard through the Labour Party are acted on and acted on quickly.
Do you think they really believe it? Maybe they do believe it.
It's not clear that Jeremy is going to act on what he's saying. I think he struggles to come to terms with this.
Sorry, what I mean is maybe his supporters actually do think this is all part of a concerted smear against him. How does the Labour Party convince those in the wider Labour movement that that is not so?
Well, if people do have genuinely anti-Semitic views, they should have no place in the Labour Party. And if some of those people are in the Labour Party and are saying what they are claiming in the name of Jeremy Corbyn, he should tell them to stop and denounce them. And if he does that immediately, I think that will make a change in the atmosphere and perhaps start to restore some trust in him.
You have spoken about your own experiences from within the Labour Party. You've also said you think anti-Semitism has become stronger in Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. Why?
Well, Jeremy hasn't recognised left-wing anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism has always existed on the left as well as on the right. And since Jeremy's been leader, I think that people in the party who harbour anti-Semitic thoughts have felt much safer in expressing them, and other people who haven't been in the Labour Party feel that they now have a much safer environment in which they can express anti-Semitism or act in that way. And that is very sad, completely unacceptable, and I hope Jeremy really is going to put a stop to it now.
And Louise, how can you be sure this won't backfire, that people won't say this is, you know, red turning on red, people like you causing problems again when actually you should be as a party trying to get the Tories out?
It's about the values of the Labour Party and what we're all about. The Labour Party is anti-racist and it's against anti-Semitism. But for that to be meaningful, the party has to act against racism and against anti-Semitism. No more turning of a blind eye, no more refusing to acknowledge anti-Semitism on the left as well as on the right.
Louise Ellman, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in.
I've been getting